In this day and age, sometimes it feels like there's not a lot of mysteries left in the world. But with an ancient, mysterious language like Japanese, there still are a lot of unsolved mysteries. And some of those mysteries will be lost in time forever. Now, what if I were to tell you, though, that one of the deepest rabbit holes you can go down when studying the Japanese language is actually right underneath our noses? It's what used to be my least favorite writing system, katakana. This is Tokyo Scramble. Thank you guys for coming back and joining me again. Since I made a video about hiragana and I was a bit dismissive about katakana, I had to make this video to make one thing really, really clear. Katakana is incredibly important to the history and the culture of Japanese, and it actually contains one of the biggest mysteries of the language as well. Now, in modern Japanese, we use katakana for basically one thing: gairaigo. Gairaigo is the language that we borrow from other languages. We translate that into an approximation of the sound using katakana, and we come up with weird words like charenji suru or hatsudeito. And I think it was because of this that when I first started studying Japanese, I said, man, we should just get rid of katakana. We should preserve like the quote-unquote pure Japanese, and we don't need this katakana garbage. And it wasn't really until I started looking into the true roots of katakana that I changed my mind 180 degrees. There is a lot of history that's really clear. And when it comes to two of our writing systems, it's very clear where that comes from. We know where kanji comes from. It comes from China. We know where hiragana comes from. If you watched the last video, you know it comes from Manyogana. And the ladies of the court developing their own cursive script to write, short letters to each other and write diaries and start writing the first novels and stories like Genji Monogatari. And we know all of that. Now the question is, at what point did katakana enter the picture? And this is a highly debated topic. Even the official sources don't really agree on where katakana came from. Some sources will tell you that it's from a scholar around the 700s by the name of Kibi no Makibi, and other sources will tell you that it's from a monk from the Heian period by the name of Kukai that developed the katakana writing system, whereas other sources won't name a specific person and will just tell you it was a certain monastic tradition or order of monks that started to collectively derive katakana from kanji. Now, any of these explanations might be okay, but no matter what explanation you look at, they will reference usually this picture. Most of the textbooks have this picture. I'll share this with you right now. This is a sheet that tries to show which kanji came from, or which katakana came from which kanji. So the closer you look at this, the less sense that it makes. Some of these do make sense, like here. Deriving mi from 3, san, makes sense because we also count in Japanese hi, fu, mi being san, and mi makes sense, right? But some of these make absolutely no sense whatsoever. They're so random, and they're taking parts from kanji that aren't necessarily specific to that kanji or that sound. Even something like tsu, that's not how you say kawa. You say kawa or you say sen. And some try to explain and say, well, a long time ago, the reading for kawa, sen, was actually shuan or something, which still doesn't sound like tsu to me, but that's fine. A lot of these are so random, like, dude, this makes no sense. Why would you just take that little part? Or even less sense if you look at like like megumi, like why would you just take like these random parts of the kanji? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm not the only one to think this way. The closer you look at this, the less sense it makes. So, this is what led people to start searching for alternative theories as to the origins of katakana. Now, taking one quick step back, remember, hiragana was for the ladies of the court and katakana was for the men. So actually, even though now we use hiragana as the main writing system in Japanese, before it used to be katakana. Hiragana was seen as a lower form of writing. And there's kind of a reason for that. Women were only writing stories and letters and diaries, and it didn't really matter that they had to be precise. Maybe someone couldn't read their cursive handwriting, and that was fine. But in the case of the men who were running the history and taking down, they were writing down the history, taking care of the business, making sure transactions were going well, writing down the words for the prayers, which were sacred. You couldn't make a mistake. So everything had to be written in katakana because there was no room for error. It had to be very clear. Makes perfect sense. However, there's reports going back through history of katakana or some type of writing exclusively used by men for almost exclusively religious purposes at the time, but something that much predates the introduction of kanji into Japan. And this is where the rabbit hole begins. What if I were to tell you that there's actually a lot more than 3 writing systems in Japanese? If I were to tell you there was a 4th one and it's not romaji, it's not the English letters, would you believe me? Well, there's an entire world of letters out there, of characters out there, and they're called jindaimoji. Or you can do the other reading, which is kamiomoji. These are the sacred letters and the sacred writings of Japanese language. Now, jindaimoji or kamiomoji can be found in jinja and all sorts of archaeological sites all over Japan. And there's many different types as well. Now, these kamiomoji are surrounded in controversy because while there's a good chance that some of them are real, there's an equally good chance that the majority of them are fakes. You see, the first time this really started blowing up was back in the Edo period. And in the Edo period, there was probably a real discovery of these kamiomoji, where real scholars were looking into finding out what these ancient hieroglyphs or these ancient writings meant. But people were finding overnight fame with these discoveries, and so all of a sudden, all of these archaeologists started finding kamiomoji all over the place. So we can be pretty sure to say that there are a lot of fakes out there. Now, even though the common story and the accepted story goes that China brought writing to Japan, and before that there was no official writing system, I think there's a good chance that there was several different writing systems that existed in Japan before. Trying to figure out where katakana comes from, you're basically left with 2 options. One, we can say that katakana was derived from a language that was a foreign language that was brought into Japan from the outside. And this is basically what the kanji explanation is. But if you're not happy with the derivation of kanji, which a lot of people are not, you have to look for a different language that, maybe it was derived from. And on the other side of that, you have the option of saying, well, maybe katakana came from within Japan. It wasn't a character that was introduced to Japan from the outside, but it was something that was created within Japan and developed over time into katakana. First up, let's start with this idea that maybe katakana was derived from a language or a written language that started in Japan. Now, in order to wrap our heads around this one, we have to step back to the Jomon period. What is the Jomon period? The Jomon period is basically Japanese prehistory. And this Jomon period extends from as far back as 15,000 BC, or maybe 12,000 BC, to about 500 BC. To imagine that a civilization existed in Japan, maybe 12,000 BC, 13,000 BC, 14,000 BC, is pretty mind-blowing, considering that the Sumerians were like 5,500 BCE. This is a significantly, this is a long time ago. And there's a lot of Jomon history and artifacts and things that were lost in a massive volcanic eruption that basically destroyed half of Japan. So there's so many mysteries and so many things that we don't know because they were basically destroyed about 7000 BC. Now, probably one of the bigger fringe theories that exists within this Kamyomoji Jindaimoji sphere has to do with a writing system called Katakana, which sounds kind of similar to Katakana. Now, it was said that this writing system that can still be found at some jinja, even though a lot of experts just call it a straight-out fake, is that it existed as part of a ancient, highly developed civilization that would have been peers to the people of Atlantis. They would use these characters, and the characters themselves had a lot of power, and they were able to manipulate the natural world with these characters. So when these characters were discovered, ever since the Edo period up until now, they've held a lot of popularity in kind of like the New Age healing circles. And there are still people who believe that these kamyomoji carry a lot of power. It's a bit in the deep end for my liking, but it's kind of fun. Now, proponents of katakana will tell us that katakana was derived from these characters, something like this. Now, at first glance, this doesn't really look anything like katakana. But let me walk you through this really fast. They would say that ra came from this part of the circle. Kind of makes sense, I guess. Ya kind of came from this part of the circle down to this little part. Okay, yeah, kind of makes sense. Now, there are a lot of these that don't make too much sense. I mean, like, I guess this kind of makes sense down here. Ha, they would probably just say it was kind of like connecting these two circles. Na kind of makes sense. I guess he kind of makes sense as well. Yeah, I don't know. Like mu, I don't really know how you would derive mu from this. I don't really know. So anyways, it's a bit of a stretch. There's not really any evidence that shows any of these katakana characters were actually created before the Edo period, and there's a really good chance that they were invented at that time, but who knows? There's no definitive proof. So maybe there was an ancient civilization in the Jomon period in Japan that created these symbols, and these symbols carried power, and they developed into katakana, and that's why katakana was considered kind of a sacred writing system only to be used by men. After the Jomon period comes the Yayoi period. The Yayoi period extends from about 350 BCE to about 250 CE. And during this time, there is a massive cultural shift. A lot of this is attributed to probably because the Yayoi people came into Japan from somewhere else, most likely from mainland China, through Korea, from that area. So there's changes in the culture, changes in the tools that people are using and making, changes in the language, all sorts of stuff. It's from this time, or about this time, the proponents of a different type of kamyomoji say comes ahirukusamoji. Ahirukusamoji looks something like this. And the proponents of this kamyomoji, some say that maybe it's a form of writing based in Sanskrit. Some people will claim that it's just directly from the gods and started in Japan. This was later developed further, simplified into a simpler writing system known as ahirumoji, which looks like this, which to me kind of looks really similar to Hangul, like Korean. And then the proponents of ahirumoji say that this later developed into katakana, which, to be honest, I can't really see. In Japan, there's kind of like these two ancient sources that kind of, they come around the Heian period, known as Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. And these two texts are basically all of the ancient affairs of things in Japan, the history of the gods and the emperors and how everything happened. And within these texts, there is reference to some type of writing system, like sacred writing system, that's referenced in these. However, it's not specific, there's no name given, and there's obviously no written examples of it. So we can assume that there probably was type of writing system, but whether that was ahirukusamoji or not, we don't know. You can look at the archaeological record, however, and find different shrines, different jinja spread throughout Japan that have these scribbly lines, and could it be fake? It might be a really, really elaborate hoax, or it might be a real thing. And if katakana was a derivative of ahirakusamoji, then it would make sense that it was seen as something kind of sacred. It would make sense that that was used as the writing that the men would only use, and it would make sense that during the Meiji Restoration and then after the war, if you're trying to break down the Japanese culture or weaken the tradition or weaken the Japanese culture, that you would try to eliminate katakana, make it irrelevant, and bring in the women's writing, hiragana. And there's a lot of political figures today that have made the katakana argument kind of a political thing. And while it may be a little bit far-fetched as well, there's always a small grain of truth even to the wildest theories. Now, I've already spent massive amounts of time on only 2 writing systems, and actually there's even more types of jindaimoji. The most famous being woshite. Woshite is another writing system that was first discovered actually in a book that was found in the 1960s that dated back to the Edo period. The woshite book that was written was called the Hotsumatsudae, and it was either is a real thing, or it is probably one of the most well thought out and elaborate hoaxes of literature of all time. So again, the oldest known sources that we have detailing the history of old Japan, and actually the oldest written sources, are the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki. Now, the Hotsumatsudae details and depicts an entirely different version of Japanese history, where major differences are there, such as Amaterasu was not a woman, it was actually a man. These are like very, very big differences in how history was detailed. And so, because of these differences, many scholars immediately dismissed it as a hoax. However, the further people look into it, the more and more it starts to become apparent that whoever made this either really was from a long, long time ago, or they had a deep, deep understanding of ancient Japanese phonology, linguistics. The words that were used were only words that come from ancient Japan. There was no mistakes. Like the person, if they'd written it in the Edo period, they didn't make any mistakes by accidentally including words that may have joined the Japanese lexicon with the introduction of kanji, or joined the Japanese lexicon later on. It used ancient grammar structures, ancient words, like the original Japanese only, with 0 mistakes and total consistency on those points. So it was a master of language and someone who put together this amazing elaborate hoax, or there actually is some substance to the Hotsumatsudae and woshite, the writing. There are many more kamyomoji found in Japan. Toyokuni moji are pretty famous ones amongst them, but the remainder of them tend to be closer to hieroglyphics than they do to actual letters, and so they're not really going to help us find the origin of katakana. So moving on, if you remembered, I had said there was 2 different options for where, finding where katakana might have been derived from. It either came from within or it came from outside. So within, maybe it came from these kamyomoji that developed in Japan themselves, or there's a possibility that katakana was imported from somewhere else. To talk about this, we have to kind of get into the origins of the Japanese language itself. And this itself is something that is still highly debated. So depending on when the textbook was printed, or how Google is feeling the day that you type it into the search, you'll find different sources telling you that Japanese comes from either the Austronesian chain of languages, which is basically through the Pacific, through the islands, and also crossing the Indian Ocean over to like Madagascar, or it's part of the Altaic religions, which kind of comes from the north, like Turkish is included in this family, Korean is included in this family, or they try to include it in the Dravidian languages, most famously known for like Tamil, which is a language that is spoken, a type of Hindi that's spoken in southern India or in Sri Lanka. Now, all of these languages seem to have like words or certain parts of the language, the sounds, the phonology of the language kind of sounds the same, or they have words that are similar, but there's nothing in any of these languages that goes so far as to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that Japanese is definitely part of this family. And that's why in more recent times, if you look at more recent sources and recent books, Japanese is now considered part of the Ryukyuan languages, part of the Japonic language branch. There is a theory out there that says that Katakana came from Hebrew. And this is a fun one, so stick with me for a minute. Up until this point, you've been seeing how I've been trying to derive, or how Japanese people in general have tried to derive katakana from kamyomoji. And they've really tried hard. They've tried even harder to derive katakana from kanji, and it's a stretch. Now, check this out. This is Hebrew compared to katakana. You notice any similarities? Not only are a lot of the symbols almost identical or very close with each other, the sounds that they produce, ka might actually be a k. Like, this is some close stuff. There was a joke going around on, SNS a while back that showed that if you write out America, in katakana, in Hebrew, it actually means something along the lines of asshole. Now, if that was where the similarities stopped, I wouldn't think much of it. Maybe it's just chance. But turns out there's a lot of words that don't just sound the same, they actually have the same meaning. 500 words that have similar sounds and meanings. Some of the most notable ones to me were kiku. Kiku, like to listen. If anyone speaks Hebrew out there, apparently this sounds pretty close to kiku, listening in Hebrew. Toru, to take. Again, if any of you speak Hebrew out there, apparently this is pretty close to like take, toru, in Hebrew. Some of the interesting ones to me, like samui, like to be cold, in Hebrew sounds something similar to the Japanese word for to freeze, the verb koru. Different things like, for when the sun comes out and the clouds go away, and hareru. You ever heard hallelujah, hareru? Yeah. So there's a lot of these examples out there. Maybe we'll never find out where Japanese came from, and maybe we'll never find out where katakana came from, because it didn't come from one source. Even now, Japanese people and the Japanese culture has never been one to really like reject foreign influences or ideas. It adapts them and makes it their own. Almost to the point where it seems so original, or you can't even see the predecessor in the current project anymore. But this has always been part of Japanese culture. And if that's the case, there will never be one source. Part of the Japanese language might be from the Dravidian family. Some might be from the Austronesian family. Some might actually have traveled down the Silk Road, and there's influence of Arabic or Hebrew or Persian in the language as well. But where does katakana come from? Yeah, who knows? The answer is I don't know, and nobody knows. But man, is that not fun? Yeah, I first started studying Japanese, and I did not like katakana, and I saw it almost as kind of like something that was insulting, the pure Japanese. And man, I was so wrong. Katakana used to be the main writing system for men. Most people believed that katakana was, tied into the spiritual, into the religious, into the divine. It was part of a divine language. Katakana, at its newest is, from the 800s. Making it over 1,000 years old. And maybe, possibly, it could be even older than that, being thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. So, you, as a Japanese language learner, I hope you can just kind of take this information, and when you're studying and trying to remember katakana, it almost makes it easier to know that these symbols that you're writing, they might actually be tying you back to a really rich, interesting, mysterious history. And now I just have a lot of fun just knowing that. And I hope you can enjoy that too. Okay, thank you guys all for the comments that you were giving me. I will make that guide on like how to read manga. I promise I'm going to put that out there. And I'll probably do another video a bit on pitch accents. And then after that, hopefully we can start getting into some actual Japanese language content. I hope you've enjoyed up to this point. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you again soon.